into international markets across the globe. There are several reasons an organization may want to internationalize. In general, the reasons for internationalization fall into three primary categories: market seeking, looking for markets to expand into and sell products throughout the year, and opportunities to sell products in a region which would not typically have access; economic, increasing profits and saving on expenses; and strategic, expanding the size of the company and working to reduce the potential risks of staying in only one market. Global Mania is helping Mia evaluate the reasons for internationalization, an important process for any company debating internationalization. Global Mania helped Mia to determine why she would want to expand internationally, and how internal expansion may benefit any organization considering going global. He explains that within each category of expansion, there are important reasons that organizations choose to internationalize. Global Mania takes a closer look at each category to help Mia understand the benefits of internationalization. 1. Market seeking. Market-seeking opportunities include looking for areas where you can sell products all year round, and methods for selling highly specialized products that wouldn't be accessible without internationalization. Specialized or unique products include items such as coffee, which is sold through international means because the beans come from specialized locations, such as Ethiopia or Ecuador. Thus, internationalization can help a company to gain a competitive advantage. This means that they want to stay ahead of their competitors. Expanding the company internationally makes the products or services accessible to customers, no matter where they may be. Further, internationalization can help companies to sell all season long. For example, some of Mia's winter clothing that would usually go on sale in the U.S. can be shipped to South Africa during the U.S. summer because it is their winter. 2. Economic reasons. Some organizations internationalize in an effort to increase profits by taking advantage of the concept of economies of scale, which is the idea that the more output an organization has, the lower the cost of manufacturing. For instance, if Mia makes 1,000 pink shirts, it will be cheaper than making 100 pink shirts. If she internationalizes, she may start making 10,000 shirts instead of 1,000, further decreasing her cost of production. Additionally, some organizations need a variety of resources or materials to meet their business needs. Importing products such as clothing materials, food items, metals, and ingredients for pharmaceuticals can be extremely expensive. Internationalizing can help companies to diversify their resources and decrease the cost of production. In the long run, this decreases the cost of their goods or services and makes them more accessible to the customers who want to purchase them. Further, companies may globalize to reduce the cost of discovering new products. Research and development is important for most organizations, and the economic advantage of expanding the company can help alleviate the expense of coming up with new products and services. It can reduce this cost by providing more affordable resources and reducing the cost of production. 3. Market reasons. Other organizations are looking to grow their company through market development, which is the process of expanding into the new markets. Large organizations may have maximized the number of market shares or control they have over their local markets. In order to continue growing, they will have to expand internationally. Organizations also seek to strategically internationalize in order to reduce the risk of operating in only one location. If Mia always operates in one market and that market crashes, then her company is at a greater risk of failing. However, if she operates in numerous markets, one could fail and the other market would keep her company alive. Global Mania explains that each of these reasons to expand internationally feeds into the important decision of taking a domestic company and making it an international business. Mia is now happy to have heard that internationalization can increase her competitiveness, provide an outlet for company growth, make use of technology, and possibly decrease the cost of importing materials for her clothing line. As Global Mania has pointed out, these are all reasons that any type of company will consider internationalization. To wrap it up, Going global, or taking a company international, is an important decision for any company thinking of moving into the international market. International business expansion, internationalization, is the process of taking a domestic or local company and expanding it to the international market. Companies seek to expand internationally for many reasons. The three primary reasons for internationalization include market seeking, searching for opportunities to sell products and services all year round, as well as providing markets with products customers may not typically have access to. In this respect, some companies look to stay ahead of competitors by increasing or maintaining their competitive advantage, or staying ahead of competitors through international growth, which can make their products and services more accessible to consumers than their competitors' products and services. Economic, seeking to increase profits or save on cost associated with production or research and development. Some companies also want to maximize economies of scale, which is the concept that the more they produce, the less it will cost them. Furthermore, it can be cheaper for a company to internationalize than pay the cost of importing essential resources or materials necessary to their production process. Strategic, looking to grow the company or looking to reduce risks associated with operating in a single market. Other organizations have already maxed out their domestic market shares or amount of the local market they have control over. Thus, they look to globalization as part of their market development or plan to grow their company. Companies looking to internationalize will use one or more of these reasons to support their push for international expansion.
Do you ever wonder how McDonald's became the largest food service retailer in the world? After all, it has 36,000 restaurants in 119 countries, serving about 70 million people a day. Only about 14,000 restaurants are in the U.S., which means that the majority of McDonald's restaurants are global. 75 years ago, it was just one restaurant in San Bernardino, California. If McDonald's were a country, it would have a bigger economy than Latvia. Their success didn't happen overnight, but it did start with a global strategy. Global strategy helps companies grow from being an international company to a global company. Once upon a time, McDonald's was classified as an international company. An international company focuses on the domestic market with some sales overseas. Their product or services are entirely made in their home country. On the other hand, an international company may also be defined as a company that sells imported products in the domestic market. When McDonald's expanded to Canada and Puerto Rico, it became a multinational company. A multinational company has products or services in just a few countries or may use services or raw materials from a select number of countries. The domestic market is still primary, but the product may be modified to satisfy their customers in other countries. For example, as Puerto Rico is primarily Spanish-speaking, the McDonald's menu is offered in Spanish and English. They may also add a few items that emulate local customs and cuisine. I remember visiting a McDonald's in Spain that offered beer, and in bigger cities in China, McDonald's delivers. The last phase is global. Just 28 years into the business, McDonald's was in less than 30 countries and opened its 5,000th restaurant in Kanagawa, Japan. With that amount of restaurants, it would be extremely difficult to modify a product or service for every country, like in the multinational phase. So in the global phase, the product, service, and brand are nearly the same worldwide. As you can see, global strategy is a process of expanding and competing in globalized markets. A company will strategize to adjust their products and pricing and assess domestic and international marketplaces to determine how they can satisfy a global audience with few variations in their product, service, and brand. There are several reasons why a company will go global and why global strategy is key. To get a competitive advantage. In 2003, McDonald's launched a Plan to Win campaign to increase sales and customer visits. To exploit services and raw materials in other countries. In the last few years, some farms in the U.S. suffered from a drought, which significantly reduced beef production. As a result, McDonald's had to import beef from New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. To extend the product life cycle. Sometimes products and services go out of style. To keep them alive, companies will refocus and promote the product or service in other countries. For example, when sales in the U.S. dipped as the population became more health conscious, McDonald's shifted focus to newer markets like China and Vietnam. To reach new markets. Similar to extending a product's life cycle, newer markets can boost company sales, especially if the production costs are lower and the demand is higher. While McDonald's in the U.S. continue to slow down, China plans to open 300 McDonald's in 2015. Global strategy is a process of expanding and competing in globalized markets. At some point, companies will be an international company with few products or services in a select number of countries. When a company is a multinational company, there are different variations of their product across multiple countries. When a company is competing in globalized markets, their product, service, and brand is presented similarly to a worldwide audience. As companies develop from an international company to a global company, global strategy is used as a guide to compete in both domestic and local markets.
Meet Alexander. He's the CEO of a small tech company in the United States with a mandate from his board of directors to enter the global market and conquer it. Alexander has several different weapons in his arsenal that can be used effectively depending upon the situation at hand. This includes exporting, licensing, franchising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, foreign subsidiaries, and foreign direct investment. Let's take a look at each. Alexander's company has already gotten its feet wet in the waters of the international market through exporting its goods to several different countries. Exporting is the process of transporting a good over international borders for trade or sale. Some of the products that Alexander's company sells include proprietary software. Alexander's company does not sell the software, but rather grants a license for its use. Note that an intellectual property right license does not give the holder ownership rights to the intellectual property, but merely the rights to use it. Exporting and licensing are probably the first steps many businesses take into the global marketplace. Alexander can go a little deeper into the sea of the global market through franchising. A franchise is a contractual arrangement between one party, called the franchisor, and another party, called the franchisee. The franchisor grants the franchisee the rights to use the franchisor's names, trademarks, business processes, and products, usually within a specified territory. McDonald's is probably the most well-known franchise. Alexander may decide to offer franchises to companies or entrepreneurs to gain a foothold in a foreign market. Of course, granting a franchise means giving up a degree of control and requires a solid legal system in the foreign market that will enforce the provisions of the franchise agreement. Alexander can start to get his company more directly involved in foreign markets through joint ventures and strategic alliances. A joint venture is a temporary business association for profit between two or more individuals or businesses that is governed by a joint venture agreement. Each co-venturer remains independent of each other. Alexander, for example, may have his company team up with a local company in a foreign market for a temporary project such as construction of a fiber optic network. Once the fiber optic network is complete, Alexander's company and its co-venturer will part ways. Alexander may also decide to form strategic alliances. A strategic alliance is a business relationship between two or more businesses that allows them to collectively achieve certain goals that neither could achieve on its own. Like a joint venture, each party to a strategic alliance maintains its independence but share the benefits and control. For example, a small startup tech company may not have the knowledge and resources to enter the telecommunications industry, and Alexander's company may be prohibited from starting a telecommunication company in the market because local regulations require a local partner. However, if the local startup and Alexander's company form a strategic alliance, they can pursue the telecommunications market together. Instead of just riding the sea of the global market and making some shore excursions, Alexander can plant a flag through foreign direct investments and foreign subsidiaries. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, is simply an investment in a business by an investor from another country. In this case, Alexander's company is the investor. A greenfield investment is an investment in a completely new enterprise. For example, Alexander may be sold on a pitch from a foreign entrepreneur to start a new cell phone company and agrees to take a 25% stake in the company. A brownfield investment, on the other hand, occurs when the investor acquires an interest in an existing company. For example, Alexander may decide to buy a 25% stake in a struggling telecommunication company in a foreign country because he sees a great opportunity in the market. Finally, Alexander may go all in and start a foreign subsidiary. A foreign subsidiary is a company owned by another company. A foreign subsidiary is formed and regulated under the laws of the foreign country and may also be subject to the laws and regulations of its owner's country. A subsidiary may be wholly owned or partially owned. For example, in the foreign direct investment, companies often buy an interest in a foreign company and take control of it as a partially owned subsidiary. On the other hand, Alexander may decide to go it alone and simply form a new subsidiary in a foreign market that is completely owned and controlled by his company. Let's review what we've learned. There are many different strategies for a business to enter the foreign marketplace. Each strategy requires a different level of commitment and risk. Companies often start by exporting and licensing their products to overseas purchasers. They may decide to wade a bit deeper and enter into franchise arrangements where a foreign company will be granted the right to use the franchisor's name, products, and business processes. A company may decide to ratchet up its commitment to the global market. It can form joint ventures and strategic alliances with companies from the foreign markets it wishes to enter. A company may also decide to make a foreign direct investment by paying a stake in a local enterprise. Finally, a company may go all in by establishing wholly owned subsidiaries in each foreign market in which it wishes to enter.
In this day and age of rapid globalization, it's become so common for companies to set up shop in locations that were previously outside their country of operation. In order to illustrate this better, let us use the example of Shoes International. Shoes International is a company from North America that hopes to set up shop in Asia, is currently deciding on the best approach to use in order to plan and effectively implement their expansion to Asia. They hope to use a foreign direct investment approach in their expansion strategy, This approach means that Shoes International will not provide licenses to foreign resellers, but instead, it will acquire its own assets in Asia and set up headquarters there as well. By using the foreign direct investment approach, Shoes International will also have direct control of all assets that it will have in Asia. This includes purchase and control of all buildings, offices, machines, equipment, and the likes that it will need in the new location in Asia. In order to begin this strategy, Shoes International needs to really justify its chosen approach. This is especially so because the cost of running a business in a foreign country is often higher than running one domestically. Shoes International also has to consider costs of cultural differences adjustments in the new location. Shoes International can effectively justify its approach by using the Ownership, Location, and Internationalization (OLI) framework, also known as Dunning's Eclectic Paradigm. This framework is useful in determining holistically if carrying out a foreign direct investment is viable for the organization or not. As mentioned, this framework can greatly help companies hoping to make foreign direct investments by providing clear justifications for the choice. The OLI framework is made up of the following three main components. They include ownership, location, and internationalization advantage. The component part of ownership advantage used to describe any specific investment or asset that Shoes International has that its competitors in Asia do not have, which is a competitive edge. This investment or asset should be able to generate healthy profits for the company. This investment or asset could be a patent or innovation on its shoes. This patent or innovation may not currently be available in Asia. Shoes International needs to be confident that this investment or asset is one that can sustain the economic situation of the company for a good period of time. In this light, companies such as Apple, Samsung, and GlaxoSmithKline have positive reputations for providing high-quality products. They also have innovative products that provide an edge over their competition. This could be an example of some ownership advantage that would enable them to manage foreign direct investments effectively. However, there is the argument that Shoes International might as well sell its products domestically using its current patents and innovations, instead of incurring the additional business costs that come with setting up foreign direct investments. Here is where the location advantage counter-argument comes in. How can Shoes International justify that the Asian location will provide greater returns on investment for the company than returns on investment from the domestic market? For example, if Shoes International requires a certain natural resource, for example, fuel, and say this resource is readily available in Asia at a cheaper price, then this becomes an excellent justification for location advantage. Shoes International can also consider the cost of production. It may be cheaper to manufacture and sell products within the same location, such as Asia, than in a separate location, such as North America, where logistics and costs of transportation may need to be considered. While setting up shop in Asia, Shoes International may be quite reluctant to have a local company managing its assets, such as its manufacturing plants. The internationalization advantage arises through this argument, that the value of assets, such as manufacturing plants, may be reduced if control is given to a local company. Shoes International would therefore prefer to maintain control of their assets in Asia. Companies in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, are often very reluctant to provide licenses to foreign companies to develop their medicines on their behalf, as this may force them to reveal their patents and innovations to third parties who may eventually steal their ideas or reduce the quality of the product, thereby reducing the reputation of the company. These all describe the internationalization advantage as a justification for carrying out foreign direct investments. The following diagram better illustrates how the OLI framework would work. It's depicted as a flowchart, indicating the steps that an organization would take if it intends to have foreign direct investments. First, an organization must ask, do we have ownership advantage over foreign competition? If the answer is no, the organization should remain within the domestic market. If the answer is yes, the organization should ask itself, do we have location advantage in the foreign country? If the answer is no, the organization should export but not set up shop in the foreign country. If the answer is yes, the organization should then ask, do we have an advantage once we internationalize production? If the answer is no, then the organization should provide licensing with foreign partners. If the answer is yes, the organization is ready for foreign direct investment. This lesson provides an overview and description of the ownership, location, and internationalization (OLI) framework, also known as Dunning's Eclectic Paradigm. This framework is used to justify why a company should make foreign direct investments instead of remaining in its home turf. Therefore, the lesson argues that the OLI framework is useful in enabling to effectively justify why it should set up shop in another country. The framework is made up of three main components. The ownership advantage, which argues that a company may have a competitive edge over similar companies in the foreign country. The location advantage, which argues that the company may be able to access resources efficiently within the foreign country. And finally, internationalization advantage, which argues that it would make better sense to manage all assets in the foreign country in order to maintain trade secrets and uphold quality of the products developed.
Meet Gunther and Maria. Gunther is the prime minister of a country that lies in the northern latitudes of the globe with a fairly temperate climate, and Maria is the leader of a nation still in the northern hemisphere, but its climate is Mediterranean. Gunther and Maria's countries are participants in globalization and global trade, which is creating a truly global market for the first time in history. Globalization is the process of creating a truly global market and involves an overall increase of international trade, which includes the flow of labor, services, goods, and capital across international borders. A true global market is an integrated market for global trade where buyers and sellers meet from all over the globe to trade with little barriers to trading. Of course, a pure global market doesn't exist yet, but globalization is bringing it closer to a reality. Globalization can provide many benefits to Gunther and Maria's countries. Let's see why. Let's assume, for the purposes of our discussion, that Gunther and Maria's countries are the only two in the world. Gunther's country is endowed with fertile soil, which its farmers use to grow hardy grains amenable to the country's colder climate. In fact, the ground is so fertile that there is excess capacity of grain, so some farmers left tilling and took up brewing beer. Over the centuries, Gunther's countrymen have become expert brewers of all sorts of beer, from light lagers to the darkest stouts. They brew a particular type of stout that uses a special variety of grain found only in Gunther's country. Some people in the southernmost part of the country started vineyards about 100 years ago. The wine produced is as good as wine produced anywhere else, but is more time-consuming and costly to produce. Maria's coastal country is much farther south. The farmers in her country were also fortunate to have fertile soil, but rather than turning to the brewing of beer, Maria's countrymen became vintners. The climate and soil was perfect for grapes, and the wine produced is excellent. In fact, one type of wine uses a grape that requires the perfect combinations of soil and climate found only in Maria's country. Not even the master vintners of Gunther's country can produce it because the grapes will not grow in their country. Some of the folks up in the northern reaches of Maria's country brew beer, but it's no match in quality to the beer produced by Gunther's country. We can say that Gunther's country has an absolute advantage in the production of their special stout, and that Maria's country has an absolute advantage in production of their special wine. British economist Adam Smith first developed the theory for absolute advantage. A country has an absolute advantage in the production of goods or services for which the country has the best resources and specialized skills. Since Gunther's countrymen are master brewers that possess a rare grain needed for the stout, we can say it has an absolute advantage in the production of the stout. On the other hand, Maria's country has master vintners who have sole access to the special grape used to make the unique wine. Keep in mind that even if the special grains or grapes were imported, the absolute advantage remains because of the added costs of importing and the specialized skill of each country in producing the particular product. They just do it better and more efficiently. The theory of absolute advantage argues that Gunther's country should focus its production on the unique stout, and Maria's country should focus its production on the unique wine. Gunther's country will then export the unique stout to Maria's country, and Maria's country will export its unique wine to Gunther's country. Focusing your production and exports on your goods and services in which you have an absolute advantage, and importing goods and services that you don't, will lead to efficient and prosperous trade for all parties. Let's assume that a tragic frost in Maria's country destroyed the year's harvest of the unique grape, making it impossible to produce the wine that gave it an absolute advantage. You'll also recall that Gunther's country produces wine as good as Maria's country, except for the unique wine from the grapes destroyed in the frost. Due to the frost damage, Maria's country does not currently have an absolute advantage in production of any product, and Gunther's country can produce just as good of wine and produce better beer. Is Maria's country out of luck? Is her country a loser in the great global marketplace? Not according to the theory of comparative advantage. The theory of comparative advantage, first proposed by David Ricardo, permits Gunther's and Maria's countries to both benefit from trade even though Maria's country no longer has an absolute advantage. Under the theory of comparative advantage, countries can specialize in goods or services for which they have a lower opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative that you give up in order to pursue a certain activity. The classic example of opportunity cost is guns and butter, defense versus social programs. The more guns you produce, the less butter can be produced. If you decide to produce more butter, the less guns can be produced. Let's illustrate comparative advantage with our two countries. Let's assume that 1 cask of wine equals the value of 1 barrel of beer. Gunther's country must forego 3 barrels of beer for each cask of wine it produces. The opportunity cost for producing 1 cask of wine is 3 barrels of beer. Maria's country must forego 3 casks of wine for every barrel of beer produced. The opportunity cost for Maria's country producing 1 barrel of beer is 3 casks of wine. We can see that Gunther's country has a comparative advantage of producing beer compared to wine, and Maria's country has a comparative advantage in producing wine. It makes economic sense for Gunther's country to produce and export beer and import wine from Maria's country, and for Maria's country to export wine and import beer. Both countries produce more value by focusing on their comparative advantage. Now let's take what we've just learned back to the real world. The world currently consists of more than 180 countries. Each country has an abundance of some resources and a deficit of other resources. Likewise, different countries have the ability to specialize in certain goods and services based upon their natural resources, education system, political and legal system, and available capital and infrastructure. Pursuant to the theory of comparative advantage, each country has the ability to benefit from trade by focusing their production and exports on those products and services with the lowest opportunity costs and importing goods and services with the higher opportunity costs. This theoretically maximizes efficiency in the global market. Trade also allows countries to increase their wealth and standard of living for their citizens from the gains made by exports and goods and services provided by imports that are not otherwise available to them or available at a much higher cost if produced locally. Let's review what we've learned. Globalization is the process of moving to a global market. The global market is a market that spans the entire world where goods, services, capital, and labor are freely traded. Global trade has the ability to increase the wealth of nations and the standard of living of their citizens. Globalization and global trade are aided by the economic concepts of absolute and comparative advantage. A country has an absolute advantage in the production of goods or services for which the country has the best resources and specialized skills. Even if a country doesn't have an absolute advantage, it does have a comparative advantage in the production of goods or services at a lower opportunity cost than other goods and services. Countries export goods and services in which they have a competitive advantage and import goods and services where they don't.
Many U.S. businesses import products. An import is any good or service produced in one country and sold to a buyer in another country. Think of imports as buying something that will be brought into our country. For example, Edward has a beautifully carved wood trunk he bought at a local import store. The trunk was handmade in India. The imports company bought several trunks from a craftsman in India and imported them to be sold in the U.S. Imports are strictly governed. There are especially tight import restrictions on goods with a potential to be hazardous. Businesses engaged in importing need to be familiar with the rules and regulations regarding international trade at both the state and federal level. Generally speaking, all imports to the U.S. must first clear Customs Border Patrol or CBP. Allowable imports are subject to duties. Duties are import taxes and vary by the type of item and the quantity imported. Other imports may be prohibited or restricted. For example, there are strict laws in reference to importing alcoholic beverages. Both the type and the amount are restricted by U.S. laws and by the laws of the state in which the shipment first arrives. Some shipments require the recipient to hold a special license. In order to import items to the U.S., an importer must fill out a U.S. Customs and Border Protection declaration. The form should contain the name and address of the supplier, a detailed description of the product, the purchase price, the weights, and the country of origin. Now let's take a look at exports. Many U.S. businesses earn profits by exporting or selling products to clients in other countries. An export is any good or service that a buyer in one country purchases from a seller in another country. Note that exports are shipped out of our country, while imports are products brought into our country. For example, Edward's company makes and sells screen-printed t-shirts. His designs are popular with teenagers in Japan, so he regularly exports t-shirts to several clothing stores in Japan. Exports are also strictly governed. In the U.S., our Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS, governs exports. The BIS is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce and has a goal of promoting national security, foreign policy, and economic interests. Like imports, companies involved in exporting must comply with applicable rules and regulations. These are known as the Export Administration Regulations, or EAR. According to EAR, some items simply cannot be exported, some require a special license, and others carry restrictions in reference to the type of good, quantity, and destination. For example, consider the long-standing trade embargo the U.S. has against Cuba. Due to strained political relations, Americans are prohibited from trading with, investing in, or traveling to Cuba. It is therefore illegal for U.S. companies to export goods to Cuba. There are several types of international trade laws governing how countries do business with one another. Like U.S. laws governing our imports and exports, other countries also have national laws affecting trade with other countries. Additionally, many countries partake in bilateral trade agreements. These are agreements made between two countries that govern trade only between those countries. However, most trade regulations made between countries are accomplished through multilateral trade agreements. These agreements are set universal rules to be followed by a number of countries. Multilateral agreements are made through organizations such as the World Trade Organization and the United Nations. The UN's Commission on International Trade Law consists of the US, Canada, China, Japan, and several more of the world's most prominent traders. Once this commission reaches an agreement, the agreement must be ratified by each participating nation. In the U.S., ratification by our federal government means the trade agreement becomes a part of our international laws and enforceable against U.S. businesses. Let's review. Many U.S. businesses engage in trade with other countries. An import is any good or service produced in one country and sold to a buyer in another country. Imports are brought into our country. Imports to the U.S. must clear Customs Border Patrol. Some imports are prohibited or restricted, while others require a special license. An export is any good or service that a buyer in one country purchases from a seller in another country. Exports are shipped out of our country. The Bureau of Industry and Security governs exports from the U.S. Exports must comply with the Export Administration regulations. International trade laws also include bilateral agreements, which are trade agreements made between two countries. Many international trade laws are multilateral trade agreements, meaning they are agreements made between many countries. The World Trade Organization and the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law both facilitate multilateral trade agreements. These agreements become enforceable law once ratified by each country. Let's look at the leading organizations and treaties in international trade, which is the exchange of goods between national borders. The leaders go by acronyms: GATT or GATT, USMCA, the EU, and WTO. We'll take a look at their individual roles. The first leader, GATT, or General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, has the objective to reduce tariffs among all member nations. This trade agreement allows for the creation of the MFN, Most Favored Nation designation, which permits the designated country to export goods with very low tariffs and other beneficial terms. An example of the power of GATT can be seen in their ability to ensure a living wage worldwide. GATT fights for companies to pay above minimum wage to help working conditions. In 1995, the GATT actually joined the WTO, which we will learn about later in the lesson. GATT is considered a success as over 100 countries are members and covers 90% of world trade. The European Union, or EU, was founded in 1993 as a successor to the former European Community. It allows 27 European countries to act as a single economic unit. It is founded on the 4 freedoms of movement of goods, services, people, and money freely across borders. 17 of these countries use a common currency, the euro. The USMCA, or United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, is the renegotiated version of the former NAFTA. Its purpose is to remove all trade barriers between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. It has also reduced restrictions on banking and provided uniform protection of intellectual property. A leading women's cosmetic company called Mary Kay is one of the success stories of the former NAFTA. The ability to eliminate trade barriers and shorter processing times of business orders allowed Mary Kay to compete with Canadian and Mexican cosmetic companies. In addition, the company built a new corporate division in Mexico, leading to many new jobs. The last of the 4 leaders is WTO, or World Trade Organization, which has absorbed GATT since its inception. The WTO tries to reduce trade barriers and governs trade agreements in areas such as agriculture and intellectual property. Each member nation of the WTO has to designate other member nations with the MFN status, leading to better trade. The WTO is unique in that it mediates disputes between nations. Every nation in the WTO is regarded with equal rights, so even smaller developing nations can challenge large ones. Not all countries want to cooperate with the WTO and regard their work as bullying. For example, the WTO can force companies to pay employees better wages. In addition, some decisions by the WTO can undermine a country's national law for the sake of trade. For example, the U.S. tried to ban the catching of shrimp through the use of equipment that were harming endangered sea turtles. The WTO ruled that banning illegal, and the U.S. could not proceed with their ruling. The GATT, NAFTA, now USMCA, the EU, and the WTO are responsible for overseeing the foundation of international trade, which is the exchange of goods between national borders. The objective of the GATT, or General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, is to reduce tariffs among all member nations. The purpose of the USMCA, formerly known as NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, is to remove all trade barriers between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. The European Union, or EU, is 27 European nations acting as a single economic bloc. Many share a common currency. The WTO, or World Trade Organization, tries to reduce trade barriers and governs trade agreements in areas such as agriculture and intellectual property. The WTO is unique in that it mediates disputes between nations.
If the world of international trade was a soap opera or a reality show, it would be called Many Different Worlds.
There would be a diverse cast of characters, all with different loyalties and alliances. Just like in reality shows, sometimes those alliances would be to their benefit, and sometimes not. Well, the same basic principle applies when we are dealing with exporting and importing and add in regional integration. In its most basic form, international trade deals with importing and exporting of goods and services between countries around the world. Companies in one country purchase and sell goods and services to companies in other countries, and that is international trade. It can and indeed does get a lot more complicated than that, but the goal here is just to give you an understanding of what international trade is. The most asked question is, if I buy something, say, from Japan, and ship it all the way over to the U.S. to use in my company, how can that be less expensive than finding someone to make it in the U.S.? The answer is simple. In different countries around the world, labor can be less expensive. There might be raw materials that are abundant in one country that cannot be found here. Some countries may have more advanced manufacturing capabilities. And then finally, exchange rates might be in your favor when buying product from another country. All these reasons add up to making the world a truly competitive place. When companies buy and sell products to one another, there are a few other considerations that need to be understood. Exchange rate, the value of one currency for the purpose of conversion to another. For example, $1 US buys 0.76 euros. Thus, the exchange rate from dollar to euros is 0.76. Tariffs. Tariffs are the taxes paid on a product when it enters a market. For example, if the tariff on tires entering Saudi Arabia is 10%, then the purchase cost of the tires plus 10% would be what the buyer pays. It is similar to the tax you pay when you buy something at the store. Transportation. As one would expect, this is the charge for transporting the item from one country to another. If a company needs the product quickly, they will ship it by airplane. If not, they will ship it by ocean. Ocean takes longer, but it's much less expensive. All these factors need to be taken into consideration when a company decides to purchase products from another company in another country. Of all of them, exchange rate is the one that most companies look at first. In our example of the euro and dollar, basically 76 cents in euros buys $1 US worth of goods. That is a 25% savings if someone in Europe buys a product from the US. So let's look at this from a cost point of view. A German company wants to purchase bolts. They can find them in Germany from a German supplier for 1,000 euros per pound. They can find them from a US manufacturer for $1,000 per pound. If the exchange rate is 0.75 euros for $1 US, they could purchase the bolts from the US supplier for 750 euros, or 1,000 times 0.75, which again equals 750. We need to add in tariffs to the purchase, so let's add another 8%. We need to also add transportation costs to the purchase, so we can add another 5%. Thus, the breakdown looks like this. The German supplier, 1,000 euros. The US supplier, 750 euros. Plus 60 euros, which is 8% of 750 for the tariffs they're going to pay. Plus 37.50 euros, 5% of 750 euros for transportation, and all this equals 847.50 euros. As you can see, it is cheaper for the German company to purchase the products from the US supplier. Now that I've explained all this, I'm about to unexplain it, if that's even a word. You see, countries got wise to the fact that developing trade alliances using regional integration helps strengthen their trade and as a group makes them stronger. Regional integration is a process in which countries enter into a regional agreement in order to enhance regional cooperation through regional structure and rules. The most well-known of these are NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is with the US, Mexico, and Canada, and the EU, or the European Union, which has 27 member countries in Europe. There are several types of integration that are present on the international market. Economic integration is a process where the economic barriers between two or more countries are eliminated. It involves specific policy decisions by governments designed to reduce or remove barriers to mutual exchange of goods, services, capital, and people. Free trade agreement means that the members of the free trade agreement charge each other lower taxes when goods are sold from one country to another, than those applicable to non-members. However, there is no free movement of goods within the area. A custom union goes further than a free trade agreement and requires its members to implement a common external tariff, or taxes, on imports from outside the union. The aim is to facilitate goods to move freely throughout the union. The creation of a common market has a goal of free movement of labor, capital, services, and persons. Now, not just products, but people, money, and services can move between the member countries freely. And finally, we have the establishment of an economic union, which entails a common currency and or the unification of monetary, fiscal, and social policies. Depending on the type of integration present, managers can adapt their business operations to make the best use of regional integration. It is important to understand that the regional integrations are set up or formed by the member countries, much like NAFTA was formed by the US, Mexico, and Canada. It is the manager's goal to understand his or her needs for international sales and match that to the regional integration that is present. For example, if the product or service has political aspects to it, maybe it's governed by laws that impact how it's produced, a manager would want to work with countries that are part of an economic union because there are laws in place that are common throughout this type of integration. Thus, as he or she works with all the member countries that are part of that integration, the laws will be the same moving from country to country. If a manager is only worried about people and products, a common market would be potentially the best type of integration to work with. They want people and equipment to move freely throughout a region, and laws are not a concern for them. Finally, if a manager just wants to sell products overseas and does not have to worry about people moving from one country to another or the social aspects of international trade, then a free trade union or customs union might be the best choice. Though please understand, if all the manager is doing is shipping tin cans around the world, they can work within any of the integration structures as well, as all accommodate products more easily than laws and people. Hi How managers work with different types of regional integration depends on the type of business they need to do. What they are selling to a country and what is involved in that sale will determine the best regional integration structure for them to target. Their decision is based on moving people and product and dealing with the legal aspects present. Once they understand what they will need to sell their products overseas, people, laws, product, or some combination of these three aspects, they can select the best form of regional integration and work with countries that are members of that regional integration type.
Meet Kara. She's the leader of a small developing country. The economy of her country is largely based on tourism and the export of basic commodities, such as agricultural products and some precious metals. Kara's country is not nearly as technologically advanced as it needs to be to compete in the global economy. Due to this problem, her country is suffering a negative balance of trade, which means it imports more goods than it exports. This also means that there's more money going out of Kara's country than coming into it. Kara wants her country to develop light manufacturing and tech industries, which she hopes will take it from a net importer to a net exporter. Kara decides to pursue a policy of trade protectionism, which is a policy aimed at restricting imports of foreign goods into a country. She wants to pursue this policy for a couple of different related reasons. First, she wants to improve her country's balance of trade by reducing imports. Secondly, she wants to increase exports by developing more profitable and competitive industries for the global marketplace. Third, in order to accomplish the second goal, she needs to protect her domestic industries from imports that will hinder their growth. Kara has several tools at her disposal to help protect her country from imports. One tried and true method of trade protectionism is the tariff. A tariff is a special type of tax that is imposed on imports. Tariffs increase the price of imports, which helps protect domestic industries because the imports become more expensive than locally produced products. Another tactic at Kara's disposal is import quotas. An import quota limits the quantity of specific products that can be imported into the country during a specific period of time. Sometimes import quotas are absolutely fixed. However, sometimes an exporting country can pay extra tariffs for imports that exceed the quota. Like tariffs, Kara can impose import quotas to help the development of her country's infant industries by reducing competition from imports. But Kara is not limited just to making life easier for her country's domestic industries by making life more difficult for importers. Kara's government can provide subsidies, which are a direct infusion of cash by a government to a business for developing industries. Additionally, the government can give tax breaks to developing industries to help reduce costs and increase positive cash flow. Of course, many foreign competitors don't receive each subsidy or tax break from their government, which means that Kara's domestic businesses have a competitive advantage. Kara also has to defend against aggressive and arguably unethical trade practices of exporting countries. One such threat is dumping, which occurs when an exporter sells a high volume of products in a foreign country at a lower price than it charges in its own domestic market. Kara's country can respond by imposing an anti-dumping duty on products it believes are being dumped on its market. An anti-dumping duty is a tariff aimed at imports that are dumped on a market. For example, Kara's country may impose a 100% duty on products dumped on her country's market, which will make the dumped product very expensive in comparison with domestic products. Kara's policy of trade protectionism has some obvious advantages. Restricting imports helps her country's domestic economy develop new industries that might otherwise be quashed by imports from other countries that have had a head start. These developing industries can add to the country's economic growth, create jobs, increase the overall wealth of the country, and lead to a better balance of trade. But trade protectionism does have disadvantages. Trade protectionism is not efficient from an economic standpoint. It's more efficient under the concept of comparative advantage for a country to focus its production on those goods for which it has an advantage in production and import those goods that it does not. Moreover, consumers in the domestic market may also have to pay a premium for a better produced import or be denied the ability to acquire it at all. This may reduce the standard of living of the citizens of Kara's country. Additionally, Kara must remember that the golden rule often applies in international trade. Countries subjected to Kara's trade protectionism may retaliate by raising trade barriers against imports from Kara's country. Kara may also decide to team up with other countries through economic integration and selective protectionism. Economic integration occurs when a group of countries or a region reduces trade barriers and coordinates certain economic activities. There are various levels of economic integration, including trade agreements, free trade areas, customs unions, and common markets. The idea is to have some of the benefits of free trade, but also keep some level of trade protectionism. It's basically about treating some trading partners better than others. Kara's country may enter into a trade agreement with another country. These agreements may be between two or more countries. They will address trade issues such as tariffs and import quotas. Countries that are not part of a trade agreement with Kara's country will be subject to higher tariffs and other trade barriers. Another option is for Kara to try to form or participate in a free trade area. Members of a free trade area will not be subject to most traditional trade barriers when engaging in trade with other members. Non-members will be subject to trade barriers set up by individual members. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, is a good example of a free trade area. Kara may also try to have her country form or join a customs union. In a customs union, trade barriers between member countries are eliminated just like with free trade areas. However, unlike free trade areas, members of a customs union will develop a unified trade policy regarding non-members. Kara's country may try to take itself even further along the path to economic integration through a common market or economic union. A common market not only lifts trade barriers between members and provides for a common trade policy, but it also lifts most barriers to the movement of capital, labor, and technology among member countries. On the other hand, an economic union is like a common market, but the member countries also maintain a consistent monetary policy, fiscal policy, and tax policy. The member countries act as a single economic unit in many ways. The European Union is an example of an economic union. Kara must also keep in mind the various international agreements and obligations to which her country may be subject. For example, if Kara's country is a signatory to the World Trade Organization, or WTO, she will have to abide by the rules and regulations governing trade set forth under it. The World Trade Organization is an international organization that is involved in regulation of international trade. It helps administer international trade agreements and encourages international trade. The new General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT 1994, is a part of the World Trade Organization regime and governs trade in goods. Let's review what we've learned. Trade protectionism is a set of policies that a country can pursue in an attempt to limit imports and protect domestic industries. Tools of trade protectionism include tariffs, quotas, and anti-dumping duties. Other measures include use of subsidies and tax breaks given to domestic industries to make them more competitive with imports. Advantages to trade protectionism include the possibility of a better balance of trade and the protection of emerging domestic industries. Disadvantages include a lack of economic efficiency and lack of choice for consumers. Countries also have to worry about retaliation from other countries. Some countries may decide to move towards a degree of economic integration, where there is a degree of fair trade among member countries and trade barriers still erected against imports from non-members. Levels of economic integration include trade agreements, free trade areas, customs unions, common markets, and economic unions. Finally, countries that are parties to the World Trade Organization must be certain to adhere to their obligations thereunder.
Many people would have a hard time living a day where they only use goods made in the United States. Whether it is cars, clothes, or electronics, the list of imported foreign goods is practically endless. Although most governments and economists agree that free trade among countries has many benefits, there are also some common reasons industries and others are opposed to it. In these situations, industries and businesses often call for trade restrictions to help protect them from cheap foreign labor that makes it hard for them to compete. As mentioned above, trade restrictions are typically undertaken in an effort to protect companies and workers in a domestic economy from competition by foreign firms. These restrictions often are labeled as protectionist strategies, which simply means trade policies that restrict the importation of goods and services produced in foreign countries. Some of the most common trade restrictions are referred to as tariffs, quotas, and embargoes. An always controversial issue in advanced economies is the topic and practice of outsourcing, which is when firms in a developed country transfer some of their activities abroad in order to take advantage of lower labor costs in foreign countries. For example, you may have experienced or heard of companies outsourcing their client service and call center operations to India and other countries where they can pay much lower wages. The benefits are lower wages and a better bottom line to American companies. The costs are potential loss of jobs and lost productivity. Governments, economists, and politicians all desire to maintain or grow existing jobs in their country. Over time, though, foreign competition, often cheaper labor, can disrupt or threaten industries that at one time had a comparative advantage, but are no longer among the world's lowest cost producers. At this point, countries and governments must make a decision. Are they better off just buying cheaper products and services from other foreign firms, and in doing so let their domestic industry struggle? Or do they protect those companies and help them stay afloat, maintaining adequate employment rates and a good standard of living for their citizens? Many times they elect to use a tariff or quota to help maintain jobs. It is important to note that although tariffs and quotas can protect jobs domestically, the use of these trade barriers can be very expensive. For example,